Humans don't just endure. We adapt, we create, and we fight for what's ours. The Cerulean Veil Nebula blazed like a green inferno against the endless dark. Its light shimmered through the thick viewport of the Etherean's command deck. Engines hummed low, a steady growl mixing with the sharp breaths of 100 alien. Captain Ceres Veyna stood tall, her deep violet eyes scanning the glowing controls. Her turquoise skin flickered faintly, a mirror to the tension coiling inside her. "Captain, we've got a signal from the Nebula," a Seris officer shouted, his voice piercing the air. His slender fingers danced over glowing runes, trembling slightly. Ceres tilted her head. The hiss of air through the vents cut through the silence, sharp and cold. She stepped to the viewport, catching the faint whiff of ozone from the power systems. Outside, cosmic dust swirled, sparkling like emerald flames in the void. The Cerulean Veil was always a sight to behold, but today it felt heavy. The Galactic Council was about to convene, and the fragile Galactic Accord, their shaky peace, teetered on the edge. "They're coming," Ceres murmured. Her words slipped out like a quiet vow. The main screen flared to life. A fleet emerged from the shadows, their black hulls gleaming like serpent scales, the Korran. Their engines roared through the comms, shaking the deck beneath her feet. Ceres clenched her fist, her small claw digging into her palm. "I am Warlord Korak," a voice snarled, deep and guttural. His image filled the screen, golden eyes blazing like molten lava. "The Galactic Accord is a lie. You're weak. I'm here to claim what belongs to the strong." Shouts erupted across the deck. Ceres raised a hand, silencing them. Her skin flared brighter, turquoise light pulsing like a defiant flame. "The Accord isn't a game," she snapped, her voice ice cold. "You want war? Step into the trial by fire." Korak's laugh sliced through the air, sharp as a blade. "I accept," he growled. "But this time, no one walks away." The screen went dark. Alarms screamed, bathing the deck in blood-red light. Ceres spun around, her white braided hair whipping against her shoulder. "Prep the arena," she ordered. "I'll stand for the Serath." Officers scrambled into action. Metal clanged as they activated the energy rings outside the ship. Ceres strode to the console, her fingers brushing over glowing runes. Trial by fire was the galaxy's unbreakable law, one-on-one combat to decide the fate of billions. She'd watched her father fall in that arena, his light fading before her eyes. "Captain," an officer's voice broke her thoughts. The Korran fleet stopped. "Something else is out there." Ceres snapped her head up. Through the viewport, a massive shadow rose from the nebula. Not Korran. Its engines screeched, a high-pitched wail that clawed at the air. The green light warped, as if space itself were roaring in protest. "What is that?" Ceres breathed, her breath fogging the cold glass. The nebula erupted in a blinding flash. A surge of green energy tore through the dark, swallowing the Korran fleet in seconds. The blast echoed, rattling. "The Etherean," Ceres stumbled back, gripping the chair's edge. As the light faded, a small ship emerged, its pearlescent hull glinting in the void. Tiny compared to the Etherean, but the power it had just unleashed was unimaginable. "Who are they?" an officer stammered, voice shaking. Ceres didn't answer. Her heart pounded. Peace had just shattered, and something new had risen from the ashes. The Etherean's command deck trembled, a low shudder rippling through the hull. The Cerulean Veil's green glow still seared the eyes, casting jagged shadows across the sleek alloy floor. Captain Ceres Veyna stood frozen, her fingers digging into the chair's edge. The echo of that blast lingered in her ears, sharp and relentless. A small alien ship hovered in the void. Too small to matter, yet it had just turned a Korran fleet to cosmic dust in a heartbeat. "Scan that energy," Ceres barked. Her voice sliced through the blaring alarms, crisp and commanding. A Sirath officer fumbled at the controls, his glowing fingers shaking over the runes. "It's off the charts, Captain," he stammered. "Not like our soul-forge cores, it's pulling power from the wreckage." Ceres frowned. Pulling power? She stepped closer to the viewport, her breath fogging the frigid glass. The mystery ship gleamed, its pearlescent hull catching the nebula's light like a polished gem. Its engines growled, a deep, primal rumble that sent chills down her spine, like a predator waking from a long sleep. "This isn't Korran tech," she muttered. "They're coming." Static crackled over the comms, a harsh buzz that made the crew wince. Ceres braced herself. Then a voice cut through, steady and unyielding. "This is Commander Torin Vax of the Phoenix Reborn. We're not your enemy." Silence gripped the deck. Ceres's pulse quickened. A figure flickered onto the main screen, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked with gray. His steel-gray eyes burned with quiet intensity, and a faint scar traced his left cheek. His left arm glowed softly, a cybernetic limb pulsing with dim blue light. "Who are you?" Ceres demanded, her voice cold as ice. Her skin flared brighter, turquoise light rippling like a defiant flame. "No one wipes out a Korran fleet and walks away clean." Torin tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "I'm human," he said. His voice was low, each word landing like a hammer strike. "We didn't die in the collapse. We survived, and now we're back." Gasps rippled through the crew. "Human?" an officer whispered, eyes wide. "That's a myth." Ceres clenched her fists. The collapse, a tale drilled into her since childhood. Earth, shattered by a Korran superweapon, reduced to ash and legend. The Sirath told it as a cautionary story of hubris. But this man, Torin, stood here, real, breathing, defiant. "You're lying," she snapped. "Humans can't survive that." Torin didn't flinch. He touched a small stone in his pocket, his gaze softening for a split second. "The Phoenix Core saved us," he said slowly. "Tech that rebuilds from ruins. We clawed our way back from what you left behind." The screen flickered. A surge of green light erupted from the Phoenix Reborn, swirling around the Korran wreckage. Ceres held her breath. The energy pulled debris into a tight spiral, forming a glowing blade of light, then dissolved it into nothing. "No way," an officer muttered, his voice trembling. A chill crawled up Ceres's spine. This tech dwarfed their soul-forge cores, raw, powerful, alien in its own right. The Galactic Council broke in over the comms. A deep Sirath voice rumbled through. "If you're human, prove it. Trial by fire. Captain Ceres will face you. Win. You speak. Lose, you're gone." Torin nodded, his eyes locked on Ceres. "I'm in," he said. His cybernetic arm pulsed, like a flame itching to ignite. Ceres stared back, her skin blazing with turquoise fury. "I'll tear you apart," she hissed under her breath. But a question gnawed at her. If humans survived, what else were they hiding? Alarms wailed again. The trial was set. The energy arena hung like a crimson beacon amid the Cerulean Veil, its red rings pulsing against the starry void. Their hum sliced through the silence, a high-pitched whine that set teeth on edge. Captain Ceres Veyna stepped onto the black alloy platform, her boots steady on the cold surface. Her turquoise skin flared, a blazing challenge lighting up the dark. Beyond the protective rings, cosmic winds howled, carrying the sharp tang of scorched metal. "They're coming," Ceres whispered. Her voice cut the air like a blade, a vow etched in steel. Across the arena, a hatch slid open with a hiss. Commander Torin Vax emerged from the Phoenix Reborn, his silver armor glinting under the red glow. His cybernetic left arm shimmered faintly, blue light pulsing in sync with his steps. Gray eyes locked onto Ceres, unyielding as stone. His boots hit the platform with a dry thud, each step a quiet promise of survival. "Ready, human?" Ceres called, her tone icy. She raised her hand, and a blade of green light flared to life from the soul-forged core on her wrist. Torin smirked faintly, fingers brushing the stone in his pocket. "Born ready," he shot back. His deep voice echoed across the arena. He flexed his cybernetic arm, and a red energy blade snapped into existence, crackling with heat. A shrill whistle split the air, the signal to begin. Ceres charged, a blur of light and fury. Her green blade slashed down, carving a screeching arc through the air. Torin dodged, his red sword meeting hers in a shower of sparks. Red and green clashed, scattering embers across the dark floor like dying stars. "Not bad," Ceres growled, spinning to kick at his legs. Her skin blazed brighter, turquoise flames dancing with her rage. "You've seen nothing yet," Torin replied, blocking the kick with his metal arm. The clang rang out sharp and clear. He shoved her back, retreating a few steps. On the Etherean, the crew watched through the screens, breath held tight. "Can humans really survive the collapse?" an officer muttered, eyes glued to the fight. Ceres struck again, her blade a relentless storm. Each swing was precise, deadly, a dance of light too fast to track. Torin parried, his red sword weaving a tight defense. He didn't counter, just ducked and blocked. Ceres narrowed her eyes. "Scared?" she taunted, leaping back, chest heaving. Torin shook his head. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, his voice steady as rock. He raised his cybernetic arm, blue light flaring bright. "Link with me, soul-forged core. You'll see the truth." Ceres froze. "Link minds? In a trial by fire?" "That's insane," she spat, but her gaze wavered. "Trust me," Torin pressed, stepping forward. "You'll understand." The cosmic winds roared louder outside the rings. Ceres clenched her jaw, then nodded. Her soul-forged core ignited, a surge of invisible energy bridging their minds. Suddenly, visions flooded her, earth burning, skies choked with red flame. A Korran superweapon tore it apart, shredding the planet into dust. Then she saw them, humans, huddled in hidden colonies within fractured space. The Phoenix core glowed, pulling life from ashes, sustaining them through centuries. Ceres stumbled, back, gasping. "Impossible!" she rasped, her blade clattering to the floor. Her skin flickered wildly, a storm of light and shock. Torin lowered his weapon, meeting her gaze. "We're not a myth," he said, quiet but firm. "We're real." An alarm shrieked from the Etherean. An officer's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain! Korran fleet's back! Bigger than before!" Ceres whipped around, eyes wide. The Nebula blazed, dark shapes of Korran ships surging through the green haze like wolves on the hunt. Torin stepped beside her, his cybernetic arm pulsing. "Fight together?" he asked, a spark in his gray eyes. Ceres snatched up her blade, glaring at him. "This isn't over," she snarled, but deep down she knew. The trial was just the beginning. The Etherean's command deck pulsed with red light, alarms wailing like a wounded beast. The Cerulean Veil's green glow bled through the viewport, clashing with the crimson haze inside. Captain Ceres Veyna stood firm, her violet eyes locked, on the Korran fleet emerging from the nebula's depths. Her turquoise skin flickered faintly, a storm of anger brewing beneath the surface. Beside her, Commander Torin Vax crouched, his cybernetic arm glowing dimly as he tapped at a wrist device. They're coming, Ceres muttered. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the visions still searing her mind. Earth's collapse, humanity's survival, the Phoenix core. Torin glanced up, his gray eyes steady. "We can stop them," he said. His deep tone cut through the chaos, solid as iron. He brushed the stone in his pocket, fingers tightening briefly. Ceres spun to face him, her green energy blade flaring in her grip. It cast sharp shadows across Torin's rugged face. "Stop them with what?" she snapped, her words biting like frost. "That tech of yours, sucking life from dead worlds. You call that survival, I call it theft." Murmurs rippled through. The crew. "The Phoenix core. Is it dangerous?" A Serath officer whispered, his glowing hands hovering over the controls. Torin stood, unflinching. His cybernetic arm pulsed, a faint blue heartbeat in the dark. "We had no choice," he said. "The collapse took everything. The Phoenix core kept us alive, rebuilt us from ashes you abandoned." Ceres clenched her fists, claws digging into her palms. Her skin blazed, turquoise light flaring like a supernova. "Rebuilt by draining what's left," she roared. "What else are you hiding, human?" Torin paused, staring past her at the Korran ships closing in. Their engines growled over the comms, shaking the deck. "I'm not hiding anything," he said slowly. "But I haven't told you all. Our hidden colonies? Not everyone there wants peace." Ceres froze. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer, her blade inches from his chest. Torin held her gaze. "Some of us want revenge," he admitted. His voice dropped, heavy as a falling star. "They'd use the Phoenix core to burn the Korran down. I stopped them. That's why I'm here." The alarm spiked, shrill and piercing. An officer shouted, "Captain, Korran ship's locked on. They're about to fire." Ceres whipped around, but her eyes stayed on Torin. "You expect me to trust you?" she spat, her voice quivering with rage. "After what I saw? Earth burned and you thrived by stealing its corpse?" Torin didn't budge. His gray eyes flashed. "I don't expect instant trust," he said. "But if we don't work together, we're both dead. Right now." A red beam erupted outside the viewport. Korran energy rounds streaked through the void, slamming into the Etherean. The ship lurched, a guttural groan echoing through the hull. Ceres stumbled, catching herself on the floor. Torin lunged forward, his cybernetic arm grabbing her wrist to haul her up. "Let go," she snarled, yanking free. Her skin flickered. Wildly, light dimming under the strain. Torin released her, but stood his ground. "Make a call," he said, his tone hard as steel. "Fight me or fight Korak. I'm picking the latter." Another blast rocked the ship, closer this time. The nebula flared, green and red swirling like blood and fire. Ceres's breath came fast. He was right. They'd die if she didn't act. But trust? That had shattered the moment she'd seen Earth's ashes in his mind. "I don't forgive." "You!" she hissed, snatching her blade. "But I'll fight!" Torin nodded, his cybernetic arm pulsing brighter. "Good enough," he said. "For now." The Korran fleet loomed larger, a massive shadow breaking through the nebula's glow. Something monstrous stirred among them, bigger, darker, deadlier. The Cerulean Veil burned bright, its green light clashing with the red streaks tearing through the void. The Etherean shuddered, a deep groan echoing through its battered hull. Captain Ceres Veyna gripped her green energy blade, her turquoise, skin flickering under the strain. Beside her, Commander Torin Vax braced against a console, his cybernetic arm glowing faintly as he scanned the chaos outside. "There's too many," Ceres growled. Her voice cut through the blaring alarms, sharp as a whip. "Got a plan, human?" Torin straightened, his gray eyes narrowing. "The Phoenix core," he said tersely. He stood tall, the faint clank of his metal arm punctuating the air. "I'll use it to hold them off." Ceres shot him a glare. "Hold them off how?" She stepped closer, her blade casting a green sheen across his face. "By draining my ship dry?" Torin shook his head, brushing the stone in his pocket. "No," he said, his tone steady as rock. "From the First Fleet's wreckage. There's enough juice left to throw up a shield." A third blast rocked the ship, deafeningly close. A chunk of the ceiling crashed down, slamming into the floor with a metallic screech. Ceres dodged, her white braid snapping against her shoulder. "Do it!" she barked. "Now!" Torin nodded. He raised his cybernetic arm, and a surge of blue light erupted. A high-pitched whine screamed from the Phoenix reborn outside. Energy spiraled from the ship, pulling cosmic dust and debris from the shattered Korran fleet into a swirling vortex. The blue glow expanded, forming a massive shield around the Etherean. Korran rounds slammed into it, exploding in bursts of red sparks. "See?" Torin said, breathing hard. "I'm not lying." Ceres stared at the shield, her violet eyes wide. Her skin flared, turquoise light pulsing with reluctant awe. "You're tougher than I thought," she admitted, her voice softening just a hair. Guttural laugh crackled over the comms, cutting her off. Warlord Korak's face filled the main screen, his golden eyes blazing like twin suns. "Nice trick, human," he rumbled, his voice dripping with menace. "But the game's not over." A bone-chilling screech tore through the void. From the hulking shadow of the Korran fleet, dozens of machines surged forward. Black steel gleamed. Under their red glowing eyes, mechanical beasts, moving with jerky precision, fast as lightning. "Iron souls," Korak declared, his grin feral. "Relics of the collapse. I fixed them. Now they're mine." Ceres stepped back, her breath catching. "War machines," she whispered. "Banned for 7 centuries." Torin's fist clenched, his cybernetic arm flickering wildly. "He's using a broken Soul Forge core," he said, his voice dropping low. "Linking his mind to those things. He's lost it." The iron souls charged, smashing through Torin's shield. Metal clashed with a deafening clang, sparks raining down like molten fire. The Etherean lurched, lights dimming as power faltered. Ceres spun toward Torin, her eyes blazing. "You know these things?" she demanded. Torin nodded grimly. "They destroyed Earth," he said. "We tried to stop them. I failed." Ceres froze. A memory flashed. Her father falling in the trial by fire, his light fading to black. She gritted her teeth. "I won't let them win again," she vowed, raising her blade. Torin met her gaze, then nodded. "Together?" he asked, igniting. His red energy soared. The iron souls roared closer, their screeches rattling the hull. Ceres hesitated, then spoke. "Together," she said, her voice hard as steel. She swung her arm, painting a green light mural in the air. "A warning signal for the Galactic Council." "Pretty," Torin said, a faint smirk breaking through. "Don't get any ideas," Ceres shot back, but a ghost of a smile flickered on. Her lips. An iron soul slammed into the ship, its claws ripping through the hull. A blast shook the deck, tearing a gash in the command wall. Black smoke choked the Etherean's command deck, curling through the jagged hole torn in the wall. The iron soul's last strike still echoed, a screeching blast that rattled the bones of the ship. Captain Ceres Veyna knelt on one knee, her hand pressed to the cold alloy floor. Her turquoise skin flickered dimly, struggling to hold its glow amid the chaos. Beside her, Commander Torin Vax stood tall, his red energy blade casting a bloody light across his scarred face. "They've breached us," Ceres snarled. She rose, gripping her green blade tight. "You were right. Those iron souls are worse than I thought." Torin glanced at the gaping hole, his gray eyes scanning the dark shapes beyond. Iron souls hovered out there, their red eyes glowing like embers in the void. "Korrak's controlling them with a busted Soulforge core," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I've got to break that link." Ceres narrowed her eyes. "How?" she demanded, stepping closer. Cosmic wind whistled through the breach, sharp with the sting of scorched metal. Torin brushed the stone in his pocket, his jaw tight. "The Phoenix core," he said. "It can sever energy ties. But I need your help." Before Ceres could press him, Warlord Korrak's guttural laugh boomed over the comms. His face flickered onto the cracked main screen, golden eyes blazing beneath scales black as volcanic glass. "You're too slow," he rumbled, his voice thick with triumph. "I've known about your hidden colonies for years, human." Torin froze. His cybernetic arm twitched, blue light flaring erratically. "How?" he snapped, stepping toward the screen. Korrak tilted his head, baring jagged teeth. "A traitor in your precious Galactic Council sold me the intel," he said. "They want humanity gone for good. I'm happy to oblige." Ceres whipped around, her violet eyes flashing with fury. "Hidden colonies?" she spat, her blade trembling in her grip. "You said some wanted revenge. Now the enemy knows where they are?" Torin's fists clenched, nails biting into his real palm. "I didn't know about a spy," he growled, his voice heavy with frustration. "I came here to stop a war, not drag it to my people's doorstep." A piercing screech cut through the air. An iron soul lunged through the breach, its steel. Claws slamming into the floor with a bone-rattling clang. Sparks flew, bright and fleeting. Ceres swung her green blade, slicing through its leg. The cut sparked, but the machine held firm, its red eyes locked on her. "They won't stop!" Ceres shouted, leaping back. Her skin flared, turquoise light pulsing with defiance. Torin charged, his red blade plunging into the machine's chest. A small explosion erupted, black smoke billowing as it collapsed, but two more surged through the gap, their screeches deafening. "He's got an army of these things," Torin panted. "Trust me, Ceres, we've got to do this together." Ceres glared at him, her chest heaving. The iron souls closed in, their claws scraping the floor. "Trust you?" she snapped. "When you hid your colonies, your vendettas?" Torin touched his stone, his gaze softening. "I hid it because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid you'd turn away. But here's the truth. Our colonies are in fractured space. The Phoenix core keeps them alive. If Korrak finds them, they're ash." Ceres paused. An iron soul lunged, but she dodged, her green blade decapitating it in a burst of sparks. "You want my help," she said, her voice steadying. "Tell me everything, now!" Torin nodded, his red blade raised. "Deal," he said. "But first, we survive!" Korrak's voice roared again. "Time's up!" he snarled. The screen went black. Outside, a massive shadow loomed, a colossal iron soul twice the size of the others, its red eyes blazing like dying stars. The Cerulean Veil blazed like a cosmic furnace, green light twisting with streaks of red in a storm of chaos. The Etherean tilted wildly, its hull groaning under the strain, black smoke pouring from the gaping wound in its command deck. Captain, Ceres Veyna stood firm, her green energy blade gripped tight. Her turquoise skin flickered fast, mirroring the pounding of her heart. Beside her, Commander Torin Vax raised his cybernetic arm, its red blade crackling with heat. Before them loomed the colossal iron soul, its red eyes glowing like twin suns gone cold, its roar shaking the void. They're coming, Ceres whispered. Her voice sliced through the chaos, edged with steel resolve. Torin shot her a glance, sweat streaking his face. "Korak's close," he said, his tone low and urgent. "He's running that thing from their flagship. We've got to break the Soulforge link." Ceres nodded sharply. "How?" She stepped closer, the cosmic wind, howling through the breach with a metallic bite. Torin brushed the stone in his pocket, his gray eyes blazing. "The Phoenix Core," he said. "It's not just for rebuilding, it can shred energy connections. But I need you with me." Before Ceres could reply, the Iron Soul charged. Its massive steel legs slammed into the deck, the impact booming. Like thunder, Ceres darted aside, her green blade slashing across its flank. The strike sparked, leaving a shallow gash. Torin lunged, his red blade stabbing at a joint. Embers flew red and hot, but the machine barely flinched. "It's too damn strong!" Ceres shouted, leaping back. Her skin flared, turquoise light. Surging with her fury, Torin panted, his cybernetic arm trembling. "He's hijacking its mind," he yelled. "Use your Soulforge core. Link with me. I'll channel the power." Ceres froze. "Link again?" she snapped, her voice quaking. "Last time I saw Earth burn. What now?" Torin locked eyes with her. "Now you'll see me fight," he said, his tone hard as iron. "Humans don't just survive. We adapt. We create. Trust me." The Iron Soul reared up, its steel arms swinging. A red beam erupted, tearing the floor apart in a shower of molten shards. Ceres dodged, rolling through the debris. "Do it!" she roared, springing to her feet. "I won't. Let him win." Torin nodded. He raised his cybernetic arm, blue light flaring bright. A piercing whine cut through the air as the Phoenix Reborn answered outside. Energy spiraled from the ship, a vortex of green pulling wreckage into its grasp. A glowing orb formed, swelling with raw power, lighting the nebula like a reborn star. "He won't see this coming," Torin growled, teeth gritted. Sweat poured down his face as he held the orb steady. The Iron Soul charged again, its claws slashing. Ceres ducked, her blade carving into its leg. Sparks flew, green and fierce. Torin hurled the orb. It slammed into the machine's chest with a deafening boom. Green light swallowed it whole, the Iron Soul staggering as its red eyes flickered. "Wildly! You did it!" Ceres gasped, steadying herself. Her skin glowed steady again, turquoise light reflecting her awe. But Korak's laugh roared over the comms. "Not yet," he snarled. "You've just pissed me off." The Iron Soul shuddered. A red pulse erupted from its core, ripping through the air. The Etherean lurched hard, metal screaming as it buckled. Torin stumbled, his cybernetic arm dimming. "He's boosting it," he rasped. "I need the full Phoenix core." Ceres turned, staring out the viewport. The Korran fleet closed in, shadows swallowing the nebula's glow. "What's your plan?" she demanded, her heart racing. Torin clenched his fist, the stone digging into his palm. "Sacrifice," he said, "to save us all." The Cerulean Veil blazed with fury, its green glow devoured by the dark tide of the Korran fleet. The Etherean rocked violently, its hull creaking like a dying beast, black smoke choking the command deck. Captain Ceres Veyna clutched her green energy blade, her turquoise skin flickering in the dim light. Before her, Commander Torin Vac stood with his cybernetic arm raised, its blue glow faltering. The colossal Iron Soul loomed outside, its red eyes searing through the haze, its growl a low thunder in the void. "Sacrifice?" Ceres snapped, her voice cutting through the chaos. She stepped closer, her white braid whipping against her shoulder. "What the hell are you planning?" Torin met her gaze, sweat dripping down his face. I'm taking down that iron soul, he said, his deep tone steady despite the strain. I'll use the full Phoenix core, but it'll cost me something. Ceris's eyes narrowed. Cost you what? She demanded, her blade casting a green sheen across his grim expression. Torin brushed the stone in his pocket, his hand trembling. My memories, he said quietly. Earth, my family, everything I've held on to. Warlord Korak's laugh rumbled over the comms, cold and vicious. A pointless sacrifice, he snarled. The Iron Soul's invincible. You'll burn. With that ship! The machine reared up, its steel claws slashing. A red beam erupted, shredding the deck into molten shards. Ceres dove aside, rolling through the wreckage. Do it! She shouted, scrambling to her feet. I'm not letting him win. Torin nodded, jaw tight. He raised his cybernetic arm, and a blinding blue surge flared to life. A shrill whine screamed from the Phoenix reborn outside, cutting through the roar of battle. Energy spiraled from the ship, dragging debris into a churning vortex. A glowing sphere swelled, its green light pulsing like a newborn star, bathing the nebula in a defiant blaze. He's not ready for this, Torin growled, teeth clenched. Sweat stung his eyes as he held the power steady. The Iron Soul lunged, its claws slashing at the deck. Ceres darted forward, her green blade carving into its leg. Sparks flew, bright and fierce. Torin hurled the sphere. It slammed into the machine's chest with a thunderous boom. Green light engulfed it, the Iron Soul collapsing as its red eyes faded to black. Smoke poured from its husk, drifting into the void. But Torin dropped to his knees, his cybernetic arm shattering. Shards of metal clattered to the floor, glinting in the dim light. Torin! Ceres yelled, rushing to his side. She knelt, grabbing his shoulder. Her skin flared, turquoise light spilling over him in waves of worry. Torin gasped, his gray eyes cloudy. I can't remember, he rasped. My family. Earth. It's gone. Ceres gripped his arm tighter. You saved us, she said, her voice trembling. That's enough. Korak's voice crackled faintly over the comms. You won this round, he growled, weaker now. But your colonies are exposed. War's coming. The screen went dead. Ceres glanced out the viewport. The Korran fleet retreated, shadows melting into the nebula's glow. She raised her hand, painting a green light mural in the air, a signal for the Galactic Council. They need to know, she said. Humans aren't the enemy. Torin nodded faintly, fingers brushing his stone. Thanks, he whispered, for trusting me. Ceres smirked, a rare softness in her eyes. Don't get sappy, she shot back. You earned it. She pulled him up, steadying him as he swayed. The Etherean's engines hummed steady again. Green light from the nebula streamed through the breach, glinting off the floor. But a faint signal blinked beyond, a strange pulse from fractured space. Ceres frowned. What's that? She murmured. Torin followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing. Trouble, he said. We're not done yet. The Cerulean Veil shimmered softly, its green light spilling through the freshly patched viewport of the Etherean. The command deck bore scars of war, deep scratches gouged into the alloy floor, stray metal shards glinting in the corners. Captain. Ceres Veyna stood at the heart of the floating arena, her green energy blade dormant. Her turquoise skin glowed faintly, a calm flame under the crimson pulse of the energy rings. Beside her, Commander Torin Vax leaned against a wall, his temporary cybernetic arm flickering with weak blue light, a patchwork fix for the one he'd lost. They're coming, Ceres said, her voice steady and low. She gazed out at the crowd. Warriors. From the Sirath, Korran, and beyond, gathered beneath the red glow. Torin quirked a faint smirk, brushing the stone in his pocket. "The council's on board?" he asked, his deep tone laced with cautious hope. Ceres nodded, her white braid shifting slightly. "After my light mural," she replied. "I showed them. The iron souls, your sacrifice. They couldn't say no." The arena hummed as warriors filed in. Serath's skin flickered like living stars, mingling with the Korran's glossy black scales. Boots clanked against the platform, a steady rhythm undercut by wary murmurs. A Serath raised a glowing hand. "Can we trust humans?" he demanded, his voice sharp and high. "They hid their colonies for years." Ceres stepped forward, her skin flaring bright. "They saved us," she snapped, her words cutting like a blade. "Torin gave up his past to stop the Iron Souls. What more do you want?" Torin pushed off the wall, his makeshift arm whirring softly. "I'm not asking for trust," he said, his voice rumbling through the arena. "I'm asking for a shot. The new alliance, we'll train together. No lines between species." The murmurs faded. A battle-scarred Korran, scales scratched and dull, nodded slowly. "I'm in," he growled. "If humans fight as hard as they say." Ceres's lips twitched. "They do," she said. "I've seen it." She raised her hand, painting a green light mural in the air. The phoenix reborn, shattering the iron soul, its glow swallowing the dark. The crowd fell silent, eyes locked on the hovering image. Torin moved to a training console, tapping it alive. A small holographic machine spun into view, whirring in midair. "This is human tech," he said. "I'll teach you. From ashes we rebuild." A young Serath warrior raised her hand, her silver skin pulsing. "I want to learn," she said, her voice shaky but firm. Ceres glanced at Torin, then nodded. "Start it up," she ordered. "I'll teach Serath art. You show them your machines." The arena sprang to life. Metal clanged as Korran warriors tested the hollow machine, their grunts echoing. Serath traced green light patterns, curves dancing in the air. Torin guided them, his deep voice steady and clear. Ceres watched, arms crossed, her skin glowing with a quiet pride she wouldn't admit. Not everyone bought in. A Korran edged back, his golden eyes narrowed. "I don't trust humans," he snarled, his voice a low rumble. "They'll stab us in the back like Korak warned." Ceres turned, closing the gap between them. "Korak lost," she said, her tone cold as ice. "You want to follow a loser?" He glared, but said nothing. Torin stepped up, brushing his stone. "I lost everything to stand here," he said. "You don't have to trust me, just this." He raised his temporary arm, blue light flaring to form a small shield in front of the Korran. The warrior flinched, then nodded grudgingly. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll give it a shot." The arena glowed, red and green lights weaving together. Ceres caught Torin's eye, her lips twitching upward. "You're good at this," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Don't get sappy," Torin shot back. But a spark lit his gray eyes. The Etherean's engines thrummed steady and strong. Beyond the viewport, a faint signal blinked from fractured space, persistent, unsettling. Ceres frowned. "There it is again," she murmured. "Trouble's not done with us." The Cerulean Veil shimmered like a quiet sea of green fire, its light filtering through the Etherean's patched viewport. The command deck felt still for the first time in days, the air heavy with the hum of engines and the faint tang of scorched metal. Captain Ceres Veyna stood alone on the observation deck, arms crossed tight. Her turquoise skin glowed softly, pulsing slow and steady like a flame at rest. Beyond the glass, cosmic dust drifted, catching the nebula's glow in tiny bursts. Of emerald light, ashes of war now drifting free. "They're coming," Ceres murmured, Her voice was softer now, stripped of its usual edge. She pressed a hand to her chest, a strange warmth stirring inside her. A hatch slid open behind her with a hiss. Boots thudded lightly, joined by the faint whir of a makeshift cybernetic arm. Commander Torin Vax stepped in, his silver armor scratched and dull under the green light. His temporary arm flickered with weak blue pulses, a jury-rigged replacement for the one he'd lost. He stopped short, gray eyes flicking from Ceres to the nebula beyond. "The warriors holding up?" Torin asked, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. He brushed the stone in his pocket, a habit he couldn't shake. Ceres nodded without turning. "They're quick learners," she said. "Your tech's a hit. The Sirath stick to light murals, but the Korran can't get enough of your machines." Torin stepped up beside her, keeping a small gap. "Good," he said. "The new alliance needs both, creativity and muscle." He stared out at the nebula, his gaze turning distant. "Humans had that once, before it all went to hell." Ceres glanced at him, her violet eyes sharp with curiosity. "You really don't remember anything?" she asked, her tone dipping low. "After the Iron Soul?" Torin shook his head, slow and heavy. "Just this," he said, opening his hand. A small gray stone sat there, catching faint glints of green light. "No clue where it's from, but it feels like it matters." Ceres studied the stone, then him. Her skin flared brighter, turquoise light spilling over her face in a rare, gentle wave. "You gave up your past to save us," she said. "I won't forget that." Torin's lips twitched, a spark lighting his gray eyes. "Don't go soft on me," he teased, his voice warm for once. "I did what I had to." Ceres let out a short laugh, sharp but real. "You're picking up my lines," she shot back, turning back to the nebula. But her smile faded fast. She pressed a hand to her stomach, her breath hitching. That warmth again, stronger now, alive. Torin tilted his head, frown creasing his brow. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone sharpening with concern. Ceres stayed, quiet. The engine's hum filling the silence. Her heart pounded louder than it should. She turned to him, eyes wide. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. "A child. Part me, part you." Torin froze. His cybernetic arm twitched, blue light flaring wild for a heartbeat. "Part me?" he echoed, his voice rough. "How?" Ceres frowned, then nodded slowly. "The Soul Forge core," she said. "When we linked, it didn't just share our minds. It bound us deeper than I knew." Torin stepped closer, his hand hovering near her shoulder. "You're sure?" he asked, gray eyes searching hers. Ceres nodded, her hand still on her stomach. "I feel it," she said. "A new life, half Sirath, half human." Her skin glowed brighter, turquoise light rippling like a beacon of hope. Torin stared at her, then out at the nebula. "A symbol," he said, his voice steadying, "for the Alliance, for what's ahead." Ceres smirked, a faint tremor in her words. "Don't get sappy," she said. "But it'll be strong. Like you. Like me." They stood there, the nebula's green light washing over them. The Etherean's engines thrummed like a heartbeat, steady and alive after the storm. Torin touched his stone, then took her hand. "I don't remember my old family," he said quietly, "but I'll damn well remember this one." Ceres squeezed his hand back, her skin flaring bright. "Me, too," she whispered, "even with trouble still out there." Torin's brow furrowed. "That signal?" he asked, nodding toward the viewport. A faint pulse blinked from fractured space, small but relentless. Ceres nodded. "It's growing," she said. "Not Korak. Something else. Your colonies, maybe?" Torin's grip tightened, his eyes narrowing. "Could be," he said. "Some of them want blood. If they know we're exposed, they'll strike." Ceres glanced at him, then down at her stomach. "We've got to protect it," she said, her voice turning. "To steal. Not just the Alliance. This kid." Torin nodded, his cybernetic arm pulsing faintly. "I won't let it burn," he swore. "Not again." The signal spiked, a shrill buzz cutting through the calm. A dark shape emerged from fractured space, closing in on the nebula. Ceres turned to Torin, her violet eyes flashing. "They're here," she said. Torin tapped his arm, waking the console. "Gear up," he replied. "These seeds of hope need us breathing." The nebula flared, its green light blazing like a phoenix ready to rise again. The Cerulean Veil burned bright, its green flames licking the edges of the endless dark. The Etherean floated steady, its engines humming a low, living pulse through the hull. The air thrummed with the breath of hundreds, Sirath, Korran, and more. Each soul a spark in the quiet after the storm. Captain Ceres Veyna stood on the observation deck, her hands resting lightly on her stomach. Her turquoise skin glowed soft and steady, mirroring the life stirring within. Beside her, Commander Torin Vax stared out the viewport, his temporary cybernetic arm flickering with faint blue light, a fragile echo of the man he'd been. "They're coming," Ceres murmured. Her voice carried a quiet edge, sharp with alertness. Torin glanced at her, brushing the stone in his pocket. "That signal," he said, his deep tone taut. "It's not letting up." He pointed out the glass, where a faint pulse blinked from fractured space, a predator's eye in the void. Ceres nodded, her skin flaring brighter. "I feel it," she replied. "Not Korak. Something worse." A low alarm buzzed, persistent and cold. A Sirath officer burst in, his glowing skin flickering with panic. "Captain!" he shouted, voice piercing. "The signal's talking. It's from fractured space." Torin strode to the console, his fingers flying over the controls. The main screen flared to life, strange runes swirling like Phoenix core energy. "It's human," he said, his gray eyes narrowing. "From the hidden colonies. They know we're exposed." Ceres turned, her hand tightening into a fist. "What's it say?" she demanded, her tones snapping like a whip. Torin gritted his teeth, reading slow and deliberate. "Humanity will have vengeance. Korran burns. Cerulean Veil is ours." "They're not here for peace." Murmurs rippled through the crew. Ceres stepped back, her hand brushing her stomach. "Vengeance?" she spat. "After everything you've done? They don't see your sacrifice?" Torin met her gaze, a shadow crossing his face. "Not everyone wants to rebuild," he said. "Some just want to torch it all. I held them back once. Now they're loose." The signal spiked, a shrill scream cutting the air. The dark shape from fractured space grew, resolving into a sleek gray ship, its red engines glowing like fresh wounds. Ceres raised her hand, painting a green light mural in the air, a warning flare for the new alliance. "They need to know," she said. "We're not letting war crash back in." Torin nodded, sparking his cybernetic arm to life. "I'll stop them," he said. "But I need the Phoenix reborn." Before Ceres could answer, a guttural laugh echoed from deep within the ship. Warlord Korak's voice crackled over the internal speakers, smug and venomous from his cell below. "You're so naive," he rumbled. "I called them here." Your colonies are mine to break. Ceres spun, her skin blazing like a turquoise inferno. What did you do? She roared, storming to the console. Korak's laugh rolled like thunder. I knew your colonies were exposed, he snarled. I sent a message. Korran's weak. Strike now. They're here, and I'll lead them out. Torin slammed his fist into the wall, the clang sharp and bitter. He played us, he growled. He's betting on chaos. Ceres glared out at the approaching ship. We've got to stop them, she said, her voice hard as steel. Not just for the Alliance, for this kid. Torin nodded, his hand clenching the stone. I'll take the Phoenix Reborn, he said. Head them off before they hit the high Nebula. Ceres grabbed his arm, her skin flaring bright. Together, she countered. You're not going solo. The Ethereans' engines roared louder, a defiant pulse. The floating arena below lit up, warriors of the new alliance gathering. Green. Serath glow blending with Korran scales. Word of Ceres and Torin spread like wildfire through Cerulean Veil. The iron souls fall, Torin's sacrifice, the seed of hope in Ceres's womb. Species rallied, eyes bright with awe. A Korran warrior pounded his chest. I fight for them! He bellowed, scales glinting. Down in the brig, Korak smirked in the dark. Legends, he muttered. I'll tear them down. His claws tapped the cell wall, plotting in silence. Torin and Ceres reached the launch bay. The Phoenix Reborn gleamed, its pearlescent hull a beacon in the gloom. Torin turned to Ceres, his gray eyes sparking. Ready? He asked, his voice low and warm. Ceres smirked, hand on her stomach. Don't get sappy, she shot back. But yeah, I'm ready. Her skin blazed, turquoise light radiating like an unyielding flame. The enemy ship closed in, its red engines snarling. A beam lanced out, slicing into the nebula and sending green light spiraling wild. Ceres squeezed Torin's hand. They're fast, she said. Torin stepped aboard the Phoenix Reborn, nodding. The Phoenix Coral stopped them, he said. But at what cost? The nebula flared, its green glow surging like a phoenix rising to meet the dark. Their legend was born, but shadows from the past weren't done hunting.